All right, you ready to get seriously mind fuck? Today we're ditching the small talk and diving headfirst into the deep end of how our brains work, or maybe how they totally screw us up.
Let's just say, assuming everyone thinks like you, it's like a recipe for disaster, man. Reality is way more complicated. And trust me, way more interesting.
Okay, so we've been, going through these notes from this AI guru, Carlos,
Right?
and he's got some wild ideas, like ranting on Twitter at 3 a.m. about how we're all living in this illusion of understanding each other.
Yeah, he calls it the, what is it? The theory of mind illusion.
The theory of mind illusion.
This idea that we're all secretly running different mental software, but we're out here pretending to speak the same language.
Right, like we think we're mind readers or something.
Yeah.
But Carlos is basically saying that most of us are just projecting our own shit onto everyone else.
Exactly. And the kicker is because many people mostly interact with others who think similarly, they fall into this confirmation bias trap.
Oh, totally.
They assume everyone sees the world the same way they do.
It's like that whole, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room thing, but for your brain. If everyone around you just gets you, maybe you need some new friends.
Ouch, but yeah.
Brutal, but probably true.
And that's where things get really interesting because Carlos is obsessed with this whole Jungian psychology thing.
Dude, Jungian functions. That stuff is wild.
Yeah.
It's not just about what you do, but how you process information, right?
Exactly. Unlike those personality tests that are all are you an introvert or an extrovert? Jungian functions focus on the mental processes that you naturally gravitate towards.
Yeah, yeah. And because our brains have limited RAM, we end up prioritizing certain thinking styles over others. There are trade-offs, right?
Right. Think about accuracy versus speed.
Okay.
Some people are all about that meticulous detail, taking their sweet time to analyze everything. Then you've got the folks who thrive on quick intuition, trusting their gut for a faster but maybe less precise answer.
Oh my God, that is so us in meetings. I'm over here like a kid in a candy store with ideas, and you're all, hold your horses, let's think this through.
Well, someone's got to be the voice of reason, right?
Ugh, fine.
But that's the fascinating thing about cognitive functions. It's not about one style being better than another. It's about recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of each approach.
So understanding this whole different operating systems thing could be the key to unlocking next level communication skills.
Totally. But here's where Carlos drops some truth bombs. He says societal norms often favor certain cognitive functions.
What?
Creating this unspoken hierarchy.
Wait, hold up. Are we saying some people are just born with better brains? That's messed up.
No, not better. But think about it. We often praise people for being quick-witted or decisive, right?
Yeah.
But those who are more deliberate and reflective might be seen as slow or indecisive.
Damn, that's messed up. We're basically punishing people for how their brains work.
And it's not just about speed, right? Remember Casey and her whole mystic thing?
Oh, yeah. The one who talks about interdimensional beings like it's nothing. What's that got to do with this?
She talks about how her dyslexia, instead of being seen as a different way of processing information, was treated like a liability. She was constantly pressured to conform to traditional learning style.
That sucks. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole just because that's how it's always been done.
Exactly. And that's a perfect example of how societal norms can stifle cognitive diversity. We end up missing out on unique perspectives and talents because we're so busy trying to cram everyone into the same mold.
Okay, so if we're all running different mental software, are we just screwed? Are we doomed to misunderstand each other forever?
Not necessarily. Recognizing these differences is the first step. It's about accepting that just because someone else's thought process is different doesn't mean it's wrong or inferior.
So it's not about changing how we think, but about understanding how others think. That makes sense, but how the hell do we actually do that?
That's the million-dollar question. It's about understanding those cognitive constraints Carlos was talking about. Remember his whole rant about thinking fast and slow? How some people think it's total BS because of that one debunked study.
Yeah, classic Carlos throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But what's the deal with thinking fast and slow? How does that play into all of this?
It all boils down to resource management, right?
Huh.
Our brains, like any system, have limited processing power, so they develop these shortcuts. That's thinking fast.
Okay, so it's like our brain's on autopilot.
Exactly. It's intuitive, based on patterns and habits we've built up over time. It lets us make quick decisions or navigate familiar situations without, overthinking it.
And then thinking slow is when we actually hit the brakes and analyze things.
Precisely. It's deliberate, effortful,
Mhm.
and usually means questioning our assumptions, looking at things from different angles.
So you're saying even something as simple as choosing what to eat for breakfast involves this whole, like, thinking fast and slow showdown in our brains.
Absolutely. You might instinctively grab your usual cereal. That's your fast system kicking in. But
Right.
then your slow system might pipe up with, hey, remember that article about the sugar overload in cereal? Maybe some eggs would be a better choice.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this tie back to understanding these different, like, thinking styles we've been talking about?
Well, Carlos argues that these two systems, thinking fast and thinking slow, are influenced by our dominant cognitive functions. Some people are wired for quick, intuitive thinking, while others are more comfortable with slow, deliberate processing.
So if I'm following you, someone who leans heavily on intuition might be more comfortable making decisions based on gut feelings and, like, big picture patterns, while someone who leans on analysis might need more time and information before forming an opinion.
Exactly. And here's the crucial part. Neither approach is inherently better.
Right.
It's about recognizing that these differences exist and approaching communication with that awareness.
So instead of getting frustrated when someone doesn't, like, immediately jump on board with my brilliant, fast-paced idea, I should try to meet them where they are.
Precisely. Maybe they need more context, more details, more time to process. Or, on the flip side, if you're someone who likes to take their time to think things through, maybe you need to be more upfront about your process.
It's like instead of thinking, they're so slow, or they're not even listening, it's more like, okay, they process information differently. How can I communicate my point in a way that works for their thinking style?
Now you're getting it. And this is where Casey made this brilliant point, drawing an analogy between cognitive functions and contrast in an image.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. I'm a visual person, so lay it on me.
Think about a photograph. If everything's the same shade, the same tone, it just looks flat and boring, right? But introduce some contrast, light and shadow, different textures, and suddenly the image pops. You start noticing details you wouldn't have otherwise.
So you're saying that different thinking styles, these contrasting cognitive functions, actually help us see and understand the world in a more nuanced way.
Exactly. Each cognitive function brings a different perspective, a different way of processing information. Just like those contrasting elements in a photograph reveal different details.
That's actually kind of beautiful when you think about it like that.
It is, and this applies not just to how we communicate with each other, but also to problem solving, creativity, even how we experience the world around us.
So instead of seeing these differences as a source of conflict or misunderstanding, we should be embracing them, maybe even celebrating them.
Now you're thinking like a true deep diver. It's about recognizing that these differences aren't just interesting quirks. They're essential to how we understand and navigate the world.
All right, we've covered a ton of ground here, from this theory of mind illusion to Jungian functions, to our brains basically being a two-headed monster of fast and slow thinking.
Right.
It's a lot to process.
Yeah, it is. But here's the thing. We can understand all this in theory, but it doesn't always translate to real life interactions, right? We still butt heads, we miscommunicate, we feel like we're speaking different languages.
Totally. So how do we actually bridge that gap? How do we move from simply understanding these differences in thinking to actually communicating and connecting better with other humans?
It's tricky, right? I mean, Carlos doesn't give us a step-by-step guide. And let's be real, people are way too complex for a one-size-fits-all solution.
For sure.
Right.
But Carlos and Casey, they do drop some interesting hints throughout their conversation.
Yeah.
What were some of those takeaways?
Well, they seem to agree that awareness is key. Recognizing those moments where misunderstandings are most likely to happen.
When I'm spitting out ideas a mile a minute and you're giving me that, are you done yet?
Yeah, well, but think about it more broadly. What are some common situations where those communication breakdowns tend to happen?
Okay, so at work, it could be during brainstorming sessions or giving feedback, or even just trying to get your point across in a meeting,
Exactly. And in our personal lives, it could be anything from figuring out weekend plans to disagreeing on, well, pretty much anything.
Right, right. Okay, so once you're aware of those potential friction points, then what? Do you just announce, hey, everyone, just so you know, I'm a highly intuitive thinker, so if you need more details, just ask.
I mean, that could be interesting.
Yeah.
But a more subtle approach might be more effective. Instead of assuming you understand where someone's coming from, take a moment to clarify.
Okay. So instead of saying, that makes no sense, you could try, can you help me understand your thinking there?
Exactly. Or what factors are you considering? Or what's your perspective on this? It's about inviting them to share their thought process, to show you their unique way of seeing things.
It's like instead of going into the conversation trying to convince them or like correct their thinking, you're coming from a place of curiosity, genuinely wanting to understand their perspective.
And that's where the real magic happens. When you approach a conversation with that kind of openness, it creates space for empathy,
Yeah.
for connection,
Yeah.
and ultimately for more effective communication.
Damn, that's deep. So it's not about erasing our differences or wishing everyone thought the same way.
Yeah.
It's about embracing those differences and using them to our advantage.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we need all types of thinkers in the world. The quick thinkers and the deliberate ponderers, the intuitive leapers, and the analytical deep divers. We need all those cognitive flavors to make this human soup we're in a little more, well, flavorful.
Beautifully said. So it's not just about understanding our own thinking styles, but appreciating the value of those who think differently.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, by understanding these different operating systems, we can start to bridge those cognitive divides and connect with each other on a deeper level.
That's a goal worth striving for. Well, there you have it. Understanding how your brain works might be the key to understanding, well, everyone else. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.